Good evening, everyone. Hi to everyone that's joined us so far. We're going to get started with a just quick introduction of our guest speaker this evening. Again, thanks everyone for joining us. This is a really important event for ourselves as a manufacturer of waterproofing products, and we're really lucky to be able to run these type of events. These not only benefit you guys that are joining us, but also us. It's really great to get the engagement and really have the opportunity to be able to hear, your thoughts and any questions you might have, whether they're product related or not. And this is why we're sort of running this event this afternoon, is really just to drive that engagement and really for everyone to understand that there's a lot of support out there. There's, passionate people throughout the industry that are really pushing and working towards making a difference and having a real positive impact with the day-to-day applications of waterproofing systems. So I'd like to really start off by just introducing Frank Moebus. He's a highly experienced and qualified professional with over 35 years of experience in the waterproofing and tiling industry. And I'm sure many of you are already familiar with some of Frank's work. He's passionate about his work and he's dedicated to providing the highest quality standards. Frank is a member of many industry organisations. These include Standards Australia, the International Standards Organisation, Artibus Innovation, and the Australian Institute of Waterproofing, just to name a few. He's also a certified surveyor of structural waterproofing, a Cert 4 training and assessing, and certificate for in-wall and floor tiling, also just naming a few of his qualifications. Frank has played a significant role in the development of the Australian standards for waterproofing, and he was instrumental in creating the newly developed Diploma in Waterproofing Design. He's also a regular speaker at industry events, and he's a valuable resource for those who are interested in learning more about waterproofing and tiling. We are grateful to have Frank joining us today to share his knowledge and experience, and I'm sure that you will find this presentation informative and engaging. So thanks again to Frank.
No worries. Thanks very much.
No drama.
Good to be here.
So I didn't miss anything, Frank, as far as...
There's a couple of things you could have added, but that's okay.
Fair enough. So I think we should just really, get stuck straight into it as far as what we're here to sort of talk about this evening, which is really about quality control, and we'll also be covering a bit of the industry updates as well. But really, as a starting question, I suppose, and it's a question that comes up a lot, is really just the importance of project planning. So what are your sort of, if we look at that specific topic, what are some of the pointers and from your experience, things that work and how things should be done?
Well, look, a lot of mistakes happen in not just in waterproofing, in any trade as a result of poor planning. And realistically, at the beginning of a project, during the design stage of the building is actually when people should be starting to engage the waterproofing membrane manufacturer or system manufacturer to see, to get their input at that time so that we don't design on the go. Certainly, you want to have all the designs squared away before you start building. That's really the ideal thing to do. And engaging the waterproofing manufacturer at an early stage is a really, really good idea. And look, sometimes you need to involve a couple of manufacturers. One manufacturer may not have a solution for everything that's required in that building. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. So I think the other day when I was speaking to you, I think one of the main points that sort of resonated with me was really, everyone is involved and everyone plays a role, right? So,
that's true, but that comes back more to when we're actually starting to build.
Yeah.
All right. So one of the things I like to do on projects that I'm involved with, and not every builder does it, but I recommend that prior to constructing any wet areas, we have a pre-construction meeting with every trade that's involved. So, and then you really talk out the entire process, what goes in what order. You talk about, things like how many fixings you need to have on the sheet based on the weight of the tiles that are going to be installed later on. How big a hole the plasterers can cut into the plasterboard, not to really make it difficult for the waterproofer. They're all the things you discuss early with everybody involved, and then you move forward. Are you better off with the new standards to screed first, or do you have enough fall in the structure to waterproof first and then screed? These are the sort of things you need to discuss prior to construction. And then what I tend to advise is, after you've come to an agreement on how everything goes, then you build a prototype. That's when you iron out all any issues that arise. And once the prototype's built, everyone's happy with the outcome, then away you go.
Yep.
And what happens then is you tend to have fewer defects, and you also speed up the program time because everybody knows what they're doing and how it should be done. There's no reworks, no complaints from the waterproofer, the plasterers didn't do this properly. Everyone knows what's going on, and you save a lot of time and money in reworks.
Yeah. No, so that'll make sense, So really, just to recap, what you're saying is, there is definitely, it should be starting at the design stage. So before, anyone's on site, we should be looking at the designs, engaging with the manufacturer of, whatever components might be in. For example, use a wet area as the example. You've got the lining board guys, the point that you raised about, screeds, that's going to determine your set downs to make sure that you've got enough gradient to the drains. And then from there, once everyone's happy with the design and everything's going to work in, it's about getting all the parties involved to, look at the prototype, build a prototype, and then just anything that's not, that people aren't agreeing with, you can adjust, and then you can just flow on from there. Everyone understand what needs to be constructed. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And then the other thing that is very important to talk through during the design stage is product compliance. Make sure the products you're specifying or that have been proposed actually comply with the required standards. And the next thing is product compatibility, to ensure that if you're using a ceramic tiling system in that wet area, that the membrane and tile adhesive system are compatible. Yeah. And there is now Australian standards that test waterproofing membrane compatibility with tile adhesive systems. That's in the tile adhesive suite of standards.
Yeah. All right. So, second question, really just project monitoring and supervision. So again, we kind of discussed this the other day, and you were sort of making some points around some strategies and processes. And some points and tips for when engaging third-party inspectors as well.
So, obviously ongoing monitoring and ongoing supervision is very important. And that's not just from the builders, on-site foremen and on-site supervisors. Clearly, they have a responsibility to supervise the contractors on site. And clearly, they should have an idea of what it's supposed to look like, for example, when the waterproof is finished. Right? But, the waterproofing contractor obviously needs to supervise the individual applicators and workers on site as well. And that's where we've got to make sure that everybody's competent, everyone knows what they're doing, everyone understands the manufacturer's instructions. I mean, they're pretty clearly written on the side of every bucket, so it's not hard to figure out those instructions. But when I go to site, quite often I see mix and match systems used, sealant from one manufacturer, membrane from a different manufacturer, even though clearly the specification was something different. So everyone needs to understand what the specification is. Then we need some supervision to make sure it all gets done properly. And when it's completed, you're as aware as well as I am that the new waterproofing standard 2021 version now has a requirement for inspections before any overlaying finishes are applied, for example, tiles or vinyl, right? So, and these are the things you need to cover before you say, okay, my wet area that I've just waterproofed is now ready for the tilers to come into. So that visual inspection as a minimum needs to be ticked off. And then, of course, there's other things that you can bring in third-party independent inspectors to do an independent assessment of the wet area that is done. And I've got examples in my previous role. We worked with a builder who approached the company and said, "Look, we're spending millions and millions on remedial waterproofing works every year. Well, what can you do?" So we put in place a system where the project specification was written that included what primers, membranes, sealants, tile adhesive, the full system was specified, and everyone agreed to adhere to that. After the membranes were applied and finished, then a third-party inspection was carried out on basically every single wet area. Right. After that system was implemented, that builder has now built more than 50 buildings that don't have a single leak in them. So just by doing that and everyone being on the same page and everyone taking some responsibility, you can eliminate all those leaks. Accidents do happen, we know that, but in this particular case, more than 50 buildings without a problem.
Yeah, so really you're highlighting again the importance of having a clear process in place, and always working towards, the required outcome, which is, a quality waterproofing application installation, right? So I'm assuming that you go out to site when you carry out your inspection, you'd be looking at, obviously obvious things, pinholes, any damage, those type of things, but then you go further and check film thicknesses, make sure that the bond breakers were where they should be, how they should be installed. Were there any other checks that you do as well, or in general?
Well, the things that I used to come across that would be the biggest area of a failure or of a do this again would be failing to properly prime any non-porous surfaces. Mm-hmm. Not putting a primer on the water stop angles or the puddle flanges. Sorry, they're called leak control flanges now, I guess. Yeah. So that's one thing, and I think it comes from when you first apply a membrane to the plastic leak control flange, it actually feels like it's pretty well stuck for the first week or so. But once the membrane's properly cured, it just peels off.
Yeah.
Right? So and that can lull people into a false sense of security. So priming those surfaces is super important with a proper bonding bridge that's fit for purpose.
Yeah. No, and I think just to sort of go back a little bit to project planning, there was a point you made the other day as well where you're pretty much making it clear that waterproofing should be treated for what it is, which is the last line of defense, right? So we got to make sure that definitely that part of it is solid. But just not to go back too much to our first question here, but this is where the design plays such a critical role.
Oh, look, 100%, and look, it's a pretty deep rabbit hole you can fall into if you really explore this, right? But, building code basically says that the requirement is to prevent water from entering into concealed spaces and behind fittings and linings, right? So that wording automatically, because it says prevent, tends to lead people to think, okay, how do I prevent water from going somewhere? Well, I'll put a barrier in front. By barrier, I mean a waterproofing membrane.
Yeah.
In my view, that's not the right way to think about it. Right? So, I quite often when I talk to people, I say, okay, what is what is it you need to have a water leak? And they say, oh, membrane too thin or pinhole, or, someone's cut a hole in the membrane, etc. Well, that's actually not entirely true. There's only really one thing you need for a water leak, and that's water. If you don't have water, it doesn't matter how good your membrane is or how bad your membrane is, you won't have a leak, right? So the way I look at it is, well, if that's the case, then the first consideration should be to get the water down the drainage pipe, which is one of the reasons why the building code is now implemented the 1 in 80 falls on where the floor waste is installed.
Yeah.
If you get most of your water down the drain, well, it's no longer there to cause you a leak. Now we can talk about waterproofing membranes as a second line of defence. And that's really how we should be looking at waterproofing membranes, rather than I'll put a membrane there, therefore it won't leak. That's not the right approach as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and I think really when we're talking about this sort of last line of defense and that second layer, we're really talking about longevity, right? We're making sure that buildings and wet areas, are going to be leak-free for decades. That's the expectation from, the homeowner or the asset owner. They're not wanting to have to fix things and change their bathroom, for example, every 5 to 10 years because there's a leak. So,
it's not that they don't want to. It's, as far as I'm concerned, they're entitled to get what they paid for, right? And they did not pay for a leaky bathroom. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have.
Mm-hmm. No, all right, good points. Just for those guys that are commenting at the moment, just to let you know that we will cover all your questions at the end of the presentation. So I do see the comments. Thanks for everyone that's commenting, and hello. But we will hold until the end of the presentation just to make you guys aware. So flood testing. Frank, what are your thoughts?
Well, another rabbit hole. But, if we're going to go there, most will go down it.
Yeah.
So flood testing will tell you whether a wet area that you're testing leaks at the time of the test. Mm-hmm. Well, that's 100% true, right? However, what it doesn't tell you is whether there's any longevity in the system. And just to give you an example, look, you can basically make a bathroom or wet area pass a 24, even a 48-hour flood test with a primer, a bond breaker sealant, and a coat of membrane. Probably 20% of the required thickness will do that for 48 hours pretty easily. Right? Yeah. So does that mean that is good QA? Well, probably not. I've got photos of bathrooms that have passed 48-hour flood tests where there's pinholes in the membrane, where the membrane is so thin you can see through it, where there's actually bare patches of concrete. They've all passed flood tests. So, yes, they've passed the flood test, but that doesn't mean that they're not going to leak in 3, 4, 5, 6 months' time. Let alone, lasting for 10 years to match the waterproofing membrane warranty.
Yeah.
So there's other ways. Certainly, as I said, in the new waterproofing standard, a visual inspection is a minimum requirement, right? That has to be done, and because it has to be done, everyone it should be recorded that it was done, on what date and by whom. Mm-hmm. The standard doesn't say who has to do it. It doesn't say the waterproofer has to do it, or the building supervisor has to do it, or the tiler has to do it. It just says that it has to be done.
Yeah.
Right. And like I said, therefore it needs to be recorded. Right. The other things you can do, and it's probably heading towards a question you're going to ask me soon, which would be other methods of integrity testing, are things like electronic leak detection, or things like ultrasonic thickness tests, non-destructive thickness tests. Right? What's the other one? There's another one I was thinking about the other day.
What do you got here? So you got high voltage, low voltage. We talked about.
They're the two different types of ELD or electronic leak detection.
Yeah, and then you're talking about seeing probe testing for sheet membranes as well.
The sheet membranes, yes. Which they're not that many sheet membranes are used in wet areas at the moment. Mm-hmm. They seem to be getting more popularity because there's no curing time.
Yeah.
But certainly the SIM probe testing is pretty important.
Yeah. So just to sort of go back to that flood testing. So the other thing that you're probably finding, just like myself at the moment, is I've been getting a lot of calls as far as, especially in the colder areas, Canberra, Tasmania, Victoria, South Australia, where I am, which was a really nice sunny day here today. But it gets really cold. So, the flood testing, so from what you're saying...
It gets cold in Queensland too, right?
Yeah, some spots, I learned that the hard way the other week. So it does. But, look, it becomes almost impractical as well a lot of the time when you think about, trying to, job planning and get things done in a timely sort of manner. The flood test can sort of put a bit of a halt on the process in the colder months. And I've seen where, it seems dry, they're not testing that it's completely cured. Everything becomes a lot more critical as well as far as have they cleaned the surface, has it been prepared sufficiently enough, is the membrane bonded and cured enough to be able to withstand sort of a flood test in a really short window.
But even with the other tests, like for example, ultrasonic thickness tests, right?
Yeah.
They need to have a reasonably cured membrane to work, right? Mm-hmm. Because they shoot an ultrasound beam through the membrane and it bounces off the first surface that has more density than the layer it's gone through, right?
Yeah.
So if you applied your membrane in 2 coats, as you should,
mm-hmm.
And then you come in and do an ultrasound test, the ultrasound might actually bounce back off the top of the first layer of membrane, right? So even for those, you need to have a reasonably cured membrane so that the density of the area you're testing is consistent all the way down to the substrate. Otherwise, you'll get a false reading. So it's very important with any testing you do that you have the membrane sufficiently cured and you have competent operators of the machinery.
Yeah.
Right? So, for example, if you were electronic leak detection, right there, so there's high voltage and low voltage. Now, low voltage requires you to put a film of water down and test it out, and it looks for leaks and gives you a buzzing signal or whatever that machine comes if it finds a breach, right? That's fine. But if you're using high voltage and the membrane is a water-based membrane and hasn't fully cured, that can cause you problems, right? And the other thing with high voltage, if you turn it up too high, it can actually punch a hole through the membrane anyway. Right, so you got to make sure that people know what they're doing when they're using the equipment. In addition to that, they also need to know what they're looking at. It's no good having a third-party inspector to come out and all they know is how to operate the machines. They should be able to walk into a room saying, "Hey, that wall should have a membrane on it. Why isn't it?" For example.
Yeah. All right.
So the curing doesn't just affect the flood testing, it affects everything, right?
Yeah.
And, if you're using, it doesn't matter what you're using. If you're using moisture-cured membranes like polyurethane-type membranes, well, they rely on moisture in the air. So quite often when it's cold, there's relatively low humidity, so even those are slowed down. Cementitious membranes, the curing process stops at a certain temperature. Right? If it gets, I think it's less than 5 degrees, pretty much cementitious systems stop curing, so they'll stay wet. Water-based systems, well, the colder it gets, the longer they take. So it's a really good idea to manage your the spaces you're working in, reducing the humidity. If you're using water-based membranes, raising the temperature prior to application, not after.
Yeah.
If you get the rooms at a reasonable temperature before you start, then the whole system will cure as normal. Fortunately, there is no. Now, I quite often get asked, I'm in Canberra at the moment, how long should I wait for a membrane before my membrane's cured? Well, how long's a piece of string? You just can't answer that question.
Yeah. 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 As you know, a lot of factors, and they're all sort of working against the curing. Cold weather, high humidity, surface temperature, moisture content of that surface, wind.
Correct.
There's so many factors that would affect the cure. So it's a really good
point.
point.
And I don't know, I've gone into quite a lot of buildings that are under construction, and for some reason, quite often, the builders program the waterproofer into the rooms at the same time as the painter. So what's the painter want to do? The painter wants to tape everything up, make sure all the windows are closed, there's no airflow. Yeah. Then he wants to spray everything, so he introduces a hell of a lot more moisture into the air. And then you're also waterproofing wet areas with water-based membranes. So, you've got virtually no chance of everything curing at a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah. So that sort of we've led into our next question there, Frank, as well, which was really around recommendations and tips for control measures. So I think we've covered sort of the stuff when it comes to relative humidity and those sort of things, but we touched on, the importance of surface prep as well, as far as avoiding things like pinholing and stuff like that.
It's important to make sure that the moisture content of the substrate is compatible with the membrane system you're applying. Right? Mm-hmm. So, if you're, and again, it's a requirement of the new waterproofing standard to actually test it. And, I've seen a lot of manufacturers have now started to put on their instructions, the minimum moisture content requirement, for say concrete, has to be equal to or less than 75% relative humidity before you put a membrane on there without a moisture barrier. So that's pretty important. Personally, I'm a fan of moisture barriers or / epoxy primers in any case, because it just takes a lot of variables out of the way, and the adhesion is vastly improved if you do the adhesion testing compared to when you're comparing epoxy and water-based primers. Mm-hmm. But it's not everyone's cup of tea. Yep. So, and what happens is, if you put in a moisture cured membrane down, and if you've got a moist substrate, well, you're going to get bubbles in your membrane for sure. Right? And you're going to get the possibility of delamination. If you're using a water-based membrane, you can also get small bubbles, but your membrane will take forever to cure because there's not enough. There's not enough. There's more moisture in the entire system than the air surrounding it can handle. Is probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah. So really, the common theme, as a response to all these questions is, again, having a process, quality control process there, understanding what are the, what's the word I'm looking for? What are the variables and how to manage them to be able to come up with a consistent outcome every time, right? So, and this is where...
It's like I said, it's a lot easier to control, when you're building multi-story buildings, right? Yep. Because then you can have the pre-construction meetings, you can have the prototype, you can check it as you go. I know it's significantly different in the housing sector. Mm-hmm. You're walking into a house, the foreman's told you, this house is ready, you get there, and it's quite often far from ready for waterproofing. I understand there's a big difference in the two, but it's certainly a lot easier when you're doing in commercial construction.
Yeah, but it's all about setting the expectations, right, and standing your ground as a contractor to ensuring that the customer that you're working with, your client, understands what the expectation is for them to be able to successfully contribute to the construction, right? So, and you see it as much as I see it, and it's the number one frustration of all our end users, right? So all the guys out there in the field that are using our products, the number one frustration that you hear time and time again is that no one seems to be taking it seriously enough, right? And this is where the standard has done a really good job of, forcing that process, forcing those things. But I think, as we'll talk about it at the end, and this is where, there is some frustration with what's happened in Volume 2, where a lot of that stuff's been kind of taken away. But the fact that it exists in the standard, it does empower the contractor to, if they're, really pushing themselves to actually buy the standard, understand it, joining into these sort of events, contacting you, these things is going to make them more able and better equipped to be able to get their clients to understand the importance. And if that doesn't work, then maybe they should look at, other avenues, who's the other builders that are around that do, because it is very frustrating from, a contractor's standpoint or point of view that, I'm sure a lot of this stuff isn't new to a lot of the guys out there. Some, it might be, but a lot of the guys understand their job at their day-to-day. They see firsthand where they're having issues time and time again. They kind of get it, but, I just thought I'd add that in there because it is something that it seems to be a common sort of theme that we come across.
Yeah, for sure. And, you might do a Cert 3 in waterproofing and that, and on that, once you have that, you can get a contractor license in Queensland and in New South Wales, and I think Victoria is just starting to go down that line. And I don't know whether there's licensing for waterproofers in South Australia or not, but just because you have a Cert 3 in waterproofing and you're technically competent doesn't automatically translate into being confident enough to stand your ground when things aren't right. And you really need to. But, the running of a business and what's involved, that's probably a whole other webinar.
Yeah. But, and this is where, if I have guys come to me, I will always push them towards engaging with someone like yourself, arm yourself with someone that
you're going to push them towards Gripset products.
Look, we don't. So for me, I'm not the sales guy, right? So, and if the sales guys are on, forgive me that I haven't mentioned our products, but the reality is it's really about having the best impact. So from yourself, Frank, from my position, I deal with the issues, right? So if I can empower the guys, sorry. Go on.
I think it's a great thing, though, that Gripset is putting these sort of things on without actually forcing Gripset products down people's throats, mate.
Cheers, mate. Yeah, because, look, at the end of the day, this kind of thing makes the industry better and it makes things flow easier for everybody that's involved, right? If we had an army of super competent builders that use super competent waterproofers that were engaging with the right people, doing these things that you're suggesting, project planning, regardless whether it's residential or commercial, then it's the best way forward, would be in a very good position.
Even in housing, right? So the majority of houses, the waterproofing and tiling is pretty much the same as the house you just finished yesterday, right? And so there's no reason why you can't have a conversation with the builder as the waterproofer or the tiler and go, hey, how about we before we do the next 50 houses and do the same mistakes over and over and over again, how about we have a sit down and have a chat about how we should build these things and how we design them now that the requirements for falls are different and that the requirements for membrane on a substrate with fall are starting to come into force. But you really should be having these conversations now with the builders to get it so everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, super critical. So I think it's the second last question of the night. So we have residential building defects. So how to avoid these and do it properly. Just sort of some last thoughts on that? We've pretty much gone through the process, right? But
well, look, the best time to rectify defects is before you started the project. Look at the design, make sure the design is workable. I don't know if there's any architects in the room, but architects are very good at drawing a dashed line onto a set of drawings and say, here, this is where the waterproofing membrane goes. That may not be the right place for the membrane to go.
Yeah.
And that's, so you can eliminate a problem while the stuff's still on paper. Right? Then during construction, like I said, pre-construction meetings, get everyone involved. Doing a successful wet area is realistically everyone's responsibility, not just the waterproofers. Let's all get involved. Let's make sure that the substrate that's prepared is correct. If it's not, well, let's at least empower the waterproofing applicator to say, hey, this isn't right. This is what needs to be done to fix it. Right? Then not just say, which I've heard so many times, well, if you don't want to do this, mate, there's 100 other guys who will do it. Well, that's very, very poor approach from a builder's perspective. And then, make sure the systems are compliant. Waterproofing membranes are tested and pass the testing. Make sure that the tiling systems that go on top of the membrane are compatible with the membrane, are compatible with the tiles, etc., etc. Same for vinyl. You can put vinyl systems on top of membranes. Make sure the adhesives aren't of a chemistry that has solvents in it and actually eats the membrane underneath. That's not ideal. Make sure there is proper supervision. I believe in independent third-party testing. Again, a lot easier to do in commercial construction when you're building multi-storey buildings. In housing, I recommend to builders, maybe if you're building 50 houses a year, have the independent person or people turn up to 10 houses randomly. If you don't want to check every one, do 20%, do 10%, do something. At least keep the people on. Everyone then knows, okay, someone might check this. Maybe I should do it right.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that people are waking up in the morning and going out, oh, today I'm really going to do a bad job, right? I don't think anyone does that, but people do make mistakes.
Yeah. No, which is something we talk about all the time as well, right? And this is where we when we talk about systems in our products, it's really about trying to create a system that's simplistic, as least amount of elements as possible to take away that risk of human error that does occur. We're all different first thing in the morning after we've had our coffee compared to, as the day goes on at the end of the day. Fatigue kicks in, all sorts of things. So, I think this is, again, goes back to that quality control process, like you're suggesting.
That's right. Yeah. And, cover your own butt. Everyone now carries around a phone with really, really good quality cameras. Take photos of your completed work.
Yeah.
When I left this place, the membrane was intact. Then someone decided to cut a hole in it. Why is that my problem?
Yeah.
I'll fix it for you, all right? But, it's not my fault.
Yeah. All right. And then the final sort of topic that we had was really just improving current processes, practices, and policies, which were really, based around what we mentioned before, waterproofing membranes not really being looked at as a primary defense, but just an element of the bigger system, right?
That's probably one of my main bugbears is that people think of I don't want this to leak, therefore I'll put a membrane there. Right? If your first consideration is getting the water down the drainage pipe and doing that quickly, and then the membrane system is a secondary layer of defence, I reckon that's probably the way to go. Now, I've been to investigated part of my job. You know, I do leak detection. I do investigations of why things leak for the courts. One example I like to use is a building that was built in 1985 in Brisbane. Right? And everyone was saying, these balconies are leaking, therefore we need to replace them all, and the cost is $2.5 million. And they've had various inspectors there, and they said, oh yeah, definitely the waterproofing membrane's failed. Okay, so they asked me to go there, and I had a bit of a look, and I thought, hang on, this was built in 85. I'll put my house on that there's not even a waterproofing membrane here. Right? So we found a loose tile, took the tile up, bingo, no waterproofing membrane. Right? And then we did flood testing, localised where they reckoned there were leaks, and no leaks after the flood testing. So then I decided to get my drone out and have a look at the facade and the roof, and bingo, there's 4 missing roof tiles. No wonder the thing was leaking, right? But obviously, immediately, the balconies get the blame. Now, my point here is that there's no membrane there and the things weren't leaking.
Yeah.
So we can actually build these things without membranes and they don't leak. Right? So if they had a waterproof, so these people would have spent millions of dollars on replacing all these balconies and it would have still leaked because no one checked the roof.
Yeah.
So first line of defence should not be the membrane. And, you know, even people think, oh, I did flood testing on this room, therefore I'm forever, my butt's covered. Well, again, not the case. Just because it's flood tested just means it didn't leak that day. But you've got to give them a much longer warranty than 1 day in most jurisdictions.
Yeah. Good. And I think we should probably finish off with just addressing what really has been referred to as the elephant in the room when we talk about compliance, and maybe if you could provide some clarity as far as Volume 2 of the NCC residential and the two...
You want to know about the deemed to satisfy solutions? All right. So in Volume 1, which is commercial construction, it's easy. Yep. The deemed to satisfy solution is things must be, building elements must be waterproof or water resistance in accordance with specification 26, and you have to follow AS 3740, right? But you've got no options. Easy. In housing, the building codes board's decided to give us options, which I'll have a view about, this is probably not the right forum to talk about that, but it now basically says you have to be waterproof or water resistant in accordance with a section of the new housing provisions, and you need to follow 3740. That's one option. The other option is that you follow the provisions of follow the housing provisions solution for waterproofing, right? So the housing provisions themselves give you something that's akin to a waterproofing standard, right? Now, what it actually is, it's pretty much the 2004 version of AS 3740 copied and pasted into the building code. So the main differences there is that probably the one that has the biggest impact is that in 3740 you're required to put the membrane onto the substrate with fall to the drain. If you follow the housing provisions, you don't have to put the membrane onto a substrate with fall. You can put it onto a flat surface even if there's a waste in the room. Right. Now, again, if you want to follow the housing provisions, that's fine. Right? However, you've got to be careful that you also, at the same time, read the membrane manufacturer's recommendations. Because if you want to follow the housing provisions, but the waterproofing manufacturer says the membrane must be applied onto a substrate with fall, then guess what? You have to go onto the substrate with fall. You can't say the housing provisions say that, so I'm went onto a flat substrate. Does that make sense?
Yep. So how it's chopped up makes sense, but why it's been chopped up is still probably the biggest,
Well, like I said, I have a view on whether that was a good idea or not. But this isn't the right forum for that one. So probably the point here is, doesn't matter which way you choose to go, but read the manufacturer's recommendations in conjunction with the building code.
Yeah.
Because you really got to follow both.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's pretty much wrapped up what we had planned to cover this evening, Frank. Again, thank you very much. I think we have some time here now to maybe address some of these questions. I'm not sure. I think you can see them as well, Frank.
Oh, I can't see the questions, mate. I had the YouTube thing up.
Yeah.
But it had like a 30-second delay, so it's no good.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just scroll through now. So we'll come through here. So we've got a few from John Blaze. So manufacturers only warrant the product, not the installation. So that's pretty well correct. But, the installation is connected to the warranty as well. So it does need to be installed, as Frank just mentioned, to the instructions. And obviously, this is where it becomes really important. If you want to retain the warranties and everything to be as expected, then we should be inspecting and confirm that things have been installed correctly, right? So, and then you're asking the question, John, should they get more involved?
Who's that?
I think the manufacturer, John, I believe that's who you're referring to. They should get more involved, which this is how we get involved, right? So we're happy to be running forums and, we provide training programs. We train our sales team the best we can as well to make sure that they have value out there in the field. But ultimately, the responsibility of the installation does fall on the applicator. Right?
It does, but I'll probably add something to that.
Yep.
So I do not know a single manufacturer of any product that would not rather receive a phone call with a question from an installer prior to a stuff up, rather than having to go out to site later on to deal with the problem. So, yes, manufacturers want to get involved, but not at the end. They want to get involved at the start. Every manufacturer has technical departments or people with an understanding of how the systems go together. When in doubt, make a phone call.
No, that's
doesn't
a really
matter
good
what
point.
the question is.
Yeah, 100%. Again, from John, the builder needs to make sure the design works and up to code, as nothing goes to plan after this, as a waterproofer doesn't know the bloody codes. So I think it's really...
Waterproofer should have an understanding of the waterproofing code, that's for sure.
Yeah, so I think I'm assuming that John is really just referring to the overall construction. This is when we're discussing, the project planning, design, and those sort of elements. So, I agree. There should definitely be an understanding within the scope of works for the waterproofer. But I also agree that if it's not done right, if it hasn't been constructed properly, it does become very difficult for that to be recognised by the waterproofing contractor sometimes.
Yeah, and that's true. And, I do quite a bit of work in the liability insurance space, and quite often I get engaged by insurance companies where a claim's been lodged against a waterproofer. I've had several of jobs where I've gone to site to investigate it, and I said, well, you haven't built it properly, so what chance has the waterproofer got? like Sky on decks, for example, they always get built wrong. But, and then the liability goes back to the builder. So does the waterproofer have to know how to build a deck? No, he doesn't, but it'd be really good if he had an understanding what it should look like before he starts waterproofing.
Mm-hmm. And then just again, just from John, when you look at the standard, it looks like it's saying that waterproofing membrane is not the last line of defense, question mark as well. So yeah, I think
that's the reason why the membrane has to go onto a substrate with fall, right?
Yeah.
So yes, you're right, John, without actually saying the standard doesn't say the waterproofing membrane shouldn't be is the last line of defense. You should manage the water first. It doesn't say that out loud, but that's what the intention is.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that as well, like at the end of the day, it's part of the building. It's one of the elements of that building design, right? The waterproofing. So I think the standard has done a really good job at emphasizing its importance. And really, there's a lot of literature in the new standard about the considerations that need to be made, things that need to be checked.
Oh, the standard could certainly be better. I'm certainly not happy with how the standard turned out.
Mm-hmm.
But it's workable. There's things in it that still drive me nuts, and I'm a member of the committee, but I only have one vote.
Yeah.
Where was I heading with this? But on the whole, the thing is designed to give you the best chance to create a leak-free wet area if you follow the standard and the manufacturer's instructions.
Yeah. Then we got Darren Hall. Can you cover again the requirements of the third-party inspection? Is this now a requirement?
So there is no requirement technically for a third-party inspection. There is in internal wet areas, however, a requirement for a minimum visual inspection prior to installing any overlaying finishes, i.e. tiles or vinyl. Right? So the requirement for that an inspection is carried out exists. Right? So that is a requirement. It is not a requirement to have that done by an independent third party. Anyone can do that inspection. Right? However, and look, this isn't me trying to get work for myself because I don't actually do those inspections. A third party that is competent and has no skin in the game often gives you a more comprehensive inspection than someone who's actually applied the membrane. But at the same time, there's no benefit in the waterproofers inspecting the membrane and not picking out a defect.
Yeah.
It'd be crazy not to pick out the defect, right? So I have no objection against the waterproofer doing an inspection, or the builder, or the tiler, whoever. The fact is, though, someone needs to do one. And because it's the requirement, you need to record that it was done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I suppose really to bring that point home as well is, we had a situation here in Adelaide, where we had some local inspectors that started using the ultrasonic film thickness testers, right? And because it was new to our industry here, a lot of contractors were freaking out because, they had applied membranes too thin and they were concerned. But they were really pushing their frustration, their concern that these guys had film thickness testing instead of really focusing on the benefit of having these guys, because it deals with any issues up front, right? You're better off that process and learning from that process and improving the way that you apply product than having to go back in 5 years or 3 years or 2 years to then deal with something that's leaking or isn't right and getting stung at that end, right? Like just like we don't like getting involved at the end of the manufacturer, we like to get it up front.
Yeah.
They should really be thinking the same way.
Well, here's the thing, though, right? So I work relatively closely with, many waterproofing contractors, right? Mm-hmm. And I know at least probably 24, maybe 36 who actually use the third-party testing as a selling point for winning jobs. So they will quote a project and they will say, okay, if you give me the job, I actually get an independent third party to come out and check all my membrane before I hand it over to the tiler. So they use that as a selling point.
Yeah.
Right? Rather than fighting against the independent third party inspection with a thickness test, etc., they're using it as a benefit of using them.
Yeah.
Right? And those guys are flat out.
Yeah, yeah.
They cannot get enough workers at the moment, which I guess that's the same across the board anyway.
Yep, yep.
But they are never short of work, those guys.
Good
and
point.
Based on that, they've actually found that they can increase their margins a little bit.
That's good. That's a good strategy. And at the end of the day, it's all about that, achieving that outcome. So it all works towards that. Yeah,
you've got to achieve the outcome, but we're also in this game to make money, right, and feed our families. So let's not forget that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And which also is another good reason why you want to make sure you do it abroad.
Yeah.
Because defect rectification can be expensive.
All right, so we're out of time, Frank, unless you've got anything else that you wanted to add, or if there's anything that you wanted to sort of close off with. Those of you that we haven't answered your questions, just quickly, Jane Bailey, if you want to get in contact with us to find out more about any future webinars and things like that, or anyone else for that matter, you can email the address that's up on the screen right now, info@gripset.com. I believe that we have all your details as well, the guys that registered. So if Frank is okay with it, happy to share Frank's details as well. If anyone has any questions for him. And Vilami, get in contact with us, and we'll definitely be able to sort of go through the product range and talk about those things as well. So no problem there. Just get in contact with us and we'll get back to you. Frank, any closing comments, mate?
Yeah, look, I've said it earlier, mate, I absolutely thank Gripset Industries for putting these events on and spreading the news, good or bad, in the industry. I think, more of these sort of events are very, very important.
Thanks, Frank. Well,
and thanks everybody who attended.
Yep, thank you. But yeah, thanks to you as well, Frank. So, as we discussed when we sort of started talking about holding this event, the message that we really wanted to send out to everyone is, things change, and when changes happen, it can be, a little bit alarming, or, there's a lot of uncertainty that comes with it. You should embrace the change. You need to, because it's happened, right? This is where we are. This is where we're landed in the industry. The best advice that we can offer is just to try and understand it the best we can. We can't stress enough, especially around these new standards and these new requirements. Get yourselves a copy, buy yourself a copy. It's an investment in your business. And then for anything that you need clarity on, you can contact Gripset Industries or Frank as well. But go on, Frank.
Believe it or not, if you have a question about a standard, you can actually send an email to Standards Australia with the question, and they will pass that question on to the relevant people in the on the relevant committee. So if you want to stay anonymous, and go via Standards Australia, that's certainly possible. And talking about standards, Shandy, we're probably 2 months away from having the new tiling standard published. Mm-hmm. So maybe worthwhile to set something up and have a chat about that.
Yep, sounds good. Perfect. Thanks again, awesome. Frank. Really, really appreciate your time.
No worries.
You're a legend. Thank you, mate.
Thank you all. Yep.